This week in Linux, we have a brand new release of the Linux kernel itself. We also have some new distro releases from AlmaLinux, NixOS, and more. Plus, there's some interesting news from Ubuntu that has people asking whether or not Ubuntu is switching to a rolling release model. We'll answer that question here on this episode of Twill, and we'll also check out some awesome news about how SteamOS is absolutely crushing Windows on the Legion Go OS. All of this and more on This Week in Linux, the weekly news show that keeps you up to date with what's going on in the Linux and open source world. Now let's jump right into your source for Linux good news. This episode of Twill is sponsored by Sandfly Security. More on them later. Linux 6.15 is officially out. While this is not a headline-grabbing release, it does deliver a steady stream of updates across file systems, drivers, and hardware support, particularly for AMD and RISC-V platforms. Also, quick note, there's a lot of new subscribers to the show and the channel lately, which, by the way, thanks and welcome. So if you haven't seen how I cover these kinds of topics on the show, this is going to be quite technical, but I also try to explain why it would matter to users as we go along. So even if you aren't that type of person who wants to follow the ins and outs of kernel development, I think you'll still find this topic interesting. Let's start with a feature that could speed things up in a big way for AMD users. This release adds support for the INVL-PGB instruction on AMD systems that support it. So like, for example, Zen 3 and later. It allows the kernel to invalidate TLB entries on remote CPUs without needing to send IPIs, without having to wait for remote CPUs to handle these interrupts, and with less interruption to what was running on those CPUs. So basically, less overhead and faster performance, especially for AMD Zen 3 and newer systems. Overlay FS just got a lot more useful for advanced setups. Overlay FS file system received a new override creds mount option that changes the credentials used for accessing the lower layers. It gives user space more flexibility and control over how access is granted in layered file systems. Now, the next thing is a subtle but very significant shift in how mounts are handled. This release includes an API to listen for mount topology changes without requiring looking at proc PID mount info. So real-time file system event tracking will be easier and more efficient for user space applications. So zero-copy networking just got simpler and faster. Zero-copy receive lets network packet data go direct to user space memory without the usual memory copying overheads. So network-heavy apps could see improved performance with less complexity in memory handling. Also, there's some kernel changes that are practical, and there's also some that are a little bit contentious. So a new security hook for the IOU ring subsystem ships with Linux 6.15, even though there were some heated criticisms from Linus Torvalds himself, and Linus questioned its purpose and the complexity it adds. So security improvements are great. Sometimes they can stir up debates. This one is basically just debated, but it is there. So maybe we'll see what happens in the future. Also, speaking of things that are contentious, Rust continues creeping into the kernel. Nova is a new Rust-based successor to the Nuvo driver for NVIDIA GPUs. It's a fresh take on open-source NVIDIA drivers, and it might finally fix some of the long-standing NVIDIA-related pain on Linux, but also there's still people who are not going to like it because of the Rust thing, but I think this is overall a good thing because more improvements to NVIDIA graphics drivers is good for the people who are using NVIDIA hardware, so I'm all for that. Even though I don't use the NVIDIA hardware, but still, I'm all for better support for people who use it. The new FWCTL or FW control, firmware control subsystem is here, though not without pushback. This new framework allows for defined remote procedure calls, or RPCs, to firmware, aiming to standardize the way device firmware can be configured, updated, and debugged securely in user space. It could streamline firmware management, but some devs argue it bypasses standard kernel processes, so there's that. File systems also got some love in this release. We have a huge performance boost with exFAT optimizations, which is especially nice if you use large external storage because thanks to these optimizations, deleting an 80 gigabyte file, 80, was massively faster after testing. So down from about 4 minutes to a mere 1.6 seconds, which is crazy. Also, mounting just got way more flexible. Currently, detached mounts can only be created from attached mounts, and this release removes that limitation. It opens the door for more advanced and modular mounting workflows. There's also progress on RISC-V and niche devices. Linux 6.15 also brings support for new extensions for RISC-V architecture, including the bfloat16 floating point extension, the XAMO and the XAL RISC extensions, as well as the ZBKB extension. The kernel continues preparing more diverse hardware, and that's great, especially for embedded and edge use cases. So whether you're using AMD or messing with file systems or just want your network to stack to perform better, Linux 6.15 is going to be an update everyone will want. But as usual, distributions will begin integrating the update based on their own timeline. Typically, you wouldn't update the kernel yourself. I mean, you technically can, but most people should just sit back and let the updates come to them. Ubuntu is getting monthly snapshot releases. Does that mean they're going to be doing a rolling release model? Well, a lot of people asking that question, and the answer is no. It does not mean that at all. In fact, these are just development milestone releases, not regular releases. So Ubuntu is introducing these monthly snapshots starting already. The first one's already out, and this is for development milestones. So Snapshot 1, Snapshot 2, etc. are going to be released for the next version of Ubuntu, which is 25.10, questing Quokka. So the 6-month cycle and the 2-year cycle for LTSs are still going to be the standard way that they're being released. This is aimed at more enhancing release testing, not replacing the formal releases. So the timeline for these snapshot releases is as follows. So the Snapshot 1 is already out. Snapshot 2 is going to be out on June 10th. July 15th will be the Snapshot 3, and then Snapshot 4 will be on August 19th. And then they're going to transition to the traditional way of the beta and the final release. They've always been doing a beta for like a month ahead of time, but not always a month, usually like a few weeks or so. And then you'd be able to do the testing then. So this is making it possible to do more testing than just that one instance. So the current process is manual, not easily accessible to testers, and slow to detect blockers because they only have the one beta, or some people who do the daily testing. That's not necessarily things that are ready to be testing. It's just stuff moving constantly and trying it at a particular time. So that's just like random people choosing random times to do testing. So this is an interesting way of doing this because they're making it more accessible for people to do the testing who want to, which means that the monthly builds will allow for continuous validation, better regression detection, and faster iteration. They're also going to be doing a lot of automating. So Canonical is leveraging Temporal, a durable execution platform, and the goal is to build automated Go-based workflows, Go as in the Go language, to replace manual release checklists. And the focus will be to have a transparent, repeatable, and testable release system that doesn't depend on the deep institutional knowledge. That basically means that people having to already know how to do stuff or knowing people who have the information to get it. And that way they can have a much more robust, documented structure. So they're going to be able to handle more complex, long-running workflows across Ubuntu's infrastructure, make releases more resilient to failures, easier to monitor, and less reliant on human intervention with this automation system. And it also encourages community contributions to test the different builds because there's more of those to test throughout the process. And also these snapshots will trigger various tests like ISO, the installer, encryption, and graphical apps testing monthly. And the test contributions will be made more accessible and encouraged. And volunteer testers can focus on edge cases and nuanced scenarios, not routine Q&A stuff. So they can be able to test some, random things that are more specific to a particular use case than just, the typical stuff you would have that you could do through automation. Now, one of the things that Ubuntu said that they wanted to do with this process is to make releases become boring, but in a good way, like the best kind of boring. Stable, reliable, and predictable. The new snapshot approach is being developed in the open and with Canonical hiring to support it. So they're actually hiring people to support this process. And the end goal is to have a faster, safer, more community-engaged releases, benefiting the devs, testers, and of course, the users. NixOS just dropped its latest release with 25.05 Warbler, and it's packed with big improvements, new tools, and even a few experimental surprises. So let's start off with the Cosmic Desktop because it's now available on NixOS. NixOS now has initial support for the Cosmic Desktop environment, which is currently at Alpha 7. So Cosmic is System76's new Rust-based desktop environment. It is not ready to go just yet. It's still in the development stage, in the alpha stage, but getting it into NixOS, even in experimental form, is pretty cool and adds to the early cross-distro adoption for the desktop itself, adding to the growing list of distros that have it, such as Fedora. So speaking of Cosmic, if you'd like to know what I think of Cosmic, I made a couple of videos showing a full walkthrough of my experience with the Cosmic desktop, which I'll have linked in the show notes. I made a video on the very first version of the first alpha release, and then again on Alpha 7. Plus, this is so cool because System76 are quite responsive, because I've received news that they have watched my coverage of their desktop and have already fixed some things that I pointed out in the latest video and are working on some others. So that's pretty awesome. Now let's get back to NixOS, because one of NixOS's core tools just got a total rewrite. NixOS Rebuild NG is a full rewrite of NixOS Rebuild in Python, and it's available for testing. It's a major modernization effort that could streamline system rebuilds and improve future flexibility, especially with Python's easier extensibility. There's also a new way to build custom NixOS images. A NixOS Rebuild build image subcommand has been added. It allows users to build platform-specific images from their NixOS configurations. This brings official image building tools in line with what the community has done with the NixOS generators, and it's now baked directly into the distro. And speaking of tools, NixOS option has also been overhauled. NixOS-option has been rewritten to a Nix expression called by a simple bash script. It's behind-the-scenes change, but it takes a lower maintenance thing for this to happen, so it adds supports for flakes, which matters for users trying to build more complex configurations. There's also big news for graphics performance and packaging flexibility. The packaging of Mesa graphic drivers have been significantly reworked, and this should reduce headaches when dealing with mismatched Mesa versions and simplify how users control which graphic stacks they're using. SSH security just got a meaningful bump as well, because OpenSSH has been updated from 9.9 P2 to 10.0 P2, dropping support for DSA keys and adding new SSH auth binary. These updates help harden systems against modern threats while improving performance under memory pressure. Small change, but big impact. They've also done some updates for other desktop environments, such as GNOME is now GNOME 48, KDE Plasma is now 6.3, and others such as XFCE and more. As Linux users, we know what's up. Security is non-negotiable, but with threats getting smarter, your security tools need to keep pace, without dragging your system down, of course. And traditional agents, they slow you down, they leave blind spots. It's time for a smarter approach, and that's why This Week in Linux is proud to be sponsored by Sandfly Security, the revolutionary agentless platform designed for Linux. Sandfly doesn't just detect and respond. It revolutionizes security with SSH key tracking, password auditing, and drift detection, covering threats from every angle. Whether your systems are in the cloud, on-premises, or in embedded devices, Sandfly ensures they're all secure without the headaches of agent-based solutions. Listen to what Celinda Lakamgi of Tate Communications has to say. Sandfly addresses a serious security gap in the industry: intrusion detection on Linux platforms. The best part of Sandfly is its agentless nature, making it a versatile application for any Linux environment. Experience security that's not just effective, but gives you peace of mind. No agents, no downtime, just cutting-edge protection. So go to thisweekinlinux.com/Sandfly to learn more. And if you're as fascinated by cybersecurity as I am, then go check out the interview we had with the CEO of Sandfly on Destination Linux. It was awesome to have him on the show. He has a really cool story about how he got into Linux, how he got into security. Also, he happened to be giving talks at like the first few DEF CONs. Really cool. Check it out, destinationlinux.net/409 for that interview. And also, if you want to get a discount, you can get the home edition for 50% off using the coupon code Destination50. That's right, Destination50 will get you 50% off the home edition of Sandfly Security. So dive into the future of Linux security at thisweekinlinux.com/Sandfly and see how Sandfly can transform your security strategy. That's thisweekinlinux.com/SANDFLY. AlmaLinux 10 is here, and as you might expect, it sticks close to Red Hat Enterprise Linux 10, but they are also adding a few community-requested features on top. Let's start with hardware compatibility. AlmaLinux OS 10 has followed Red Hat's decision to ship x86-64-v3 optimized binaries by default, but they will also provide additional x86-64-v2 architecture, allowing users on that older hardware to continue to receive security updates for another 10 years. Red Hat dropped support for older CPUs in RHEL 10, AlmaLinux decided to keep it going, which is great for people who are running that older hardware. For those who are curious why the transition, Red Hat's shift to an x86 64v3 baseline in RHEL 10 enables the operating system to leverage advanced CPU features introduced with Intel's Haswell, which was in 2013, and AMD's Excavator, which is in 2015, and they're these microarchitectures. These features include AVX2, FMA, and BMI2 instruction sets, which enhances performance for compute-intensive tasks by allowing better vectorization and more efficient mathematical operations. But this is also great for AlmaLinux because it makes it possible for those who want to use the older hardware to still keep it around by having the support for the V2 rather than just the V3. So that's good to see. Another request that has been fulfilled by the AlmaLinux team is that developers wanting frame pointers. So AlmaLinux OS 10 is now enabling frame pointers by default. This makes real-time tracing and performance profiling way easier and essential for optimizing apps on production systems. Also, AlmaLinux OS 10 now supports Secure Boot for Intel and AMD, as well as ARM platforms, and they've also re-enabled support for Spice. For those who don't know, Spice is a way it's basically a feature for virtual desktops and remote access. And this return makes improvements for those who want to use it for both server and client applications. AlmaLinux OS 10 also includes a tech preview of KVM virtualization support for IBM Power architecture, and they've also re-added over 150 devices that were disabled for RHEL support. So you can, if you have these, there's a list I'll have linked in the show notes. So if you have any of these 150, this would be a good option to use so you can keep the older systems usable. Also, migration support is being actively developed to help users transition smoothly from previous versions or from CentOS-derived systems. So you have support for the Elevate project or Elevate project and the migration tool for the AlmaLinux OS 10. So that's what's in AlmaLinux OS 10. Still RHEL compatible, but it also comes with tweaks for those that need them. Not familiar with what's new in RHEL 10 itself? Well, go check out the last week's episode of This Week in Linux where I talked about what's new in Red Hat Enterprise Linux 10, link in the show notes. So SteamOS massively is beating Windows on the Legion Go S, which is fantastic. So according to some benchmarks done by tech YouTuber Dave2D, SteamOS just crushed Windows in the handheld space, and it's not even close. Windows Central is reporting on this, and that's fantastic to see because it's an embarrassment for Microsoft, as they say. So let's kick off with the biggest headline here, and that is performance. On the Legion Go S, games running on SteamOS are just better performing than the same game running on Windows 11 by like 5 to 10, maybe even sometimes 15%. Now, why is this notable? Well, this is the first time we've had an identical piece of hardware to test SteamOS versus Windows. And SteamOS wins in most titles by a lot, proving Linux gaming has come a long way. But what good is performance without battery life? Well, the battery life was much longer with Linux and SteamOS, and it's because Linux doesn't have all the crazy background tasks and telemetry stuff that Windows does. So in real-world testing, SteamOS nearly doubled the battery life in some games like Dead Cells and Hades compared to Windows, showing just how power-hungry Windows really is on handhelds. Now, suspend and resume might seem like a basic functionality, but it's very important, especially with these handheld gaming devices. SteamOS brings excellent sleep and suspend functionality to the device. You put it to sleep, and overnight it drains like 1 to 2%, Dave said, and then you just resume playing. Whereas Windows, well, when Windows handhelds often fail to go into sleep mode properly, draining power or even breaking your session. SteamOS just works like a gaming console should. Next up, we have the user experience comparison. This is very cool because SteamOS is very intuitive and snappy and responsive, as Dave says in his video. There's no pop-ups, there's no Microsoft bloat, and all of that. So SteamOS is optimized for gaming, no update prompts, no weird UI mismatches, just plug in and play, and that is the ease of use of what gamers want, you know? And with all of these improvements and the better performance, the better experience, it's got to cost more, right? Nope, it's cheaper. The Steam Deck OLED comes in at $550, the Legion Go S, you're going to pay a little bit more. You're going to pay $599 instead of $550, and that could be for a variety of reasons, but it is still cheaper than the Windows version because Windows devices require a license. So you're adding an additional cost on top of that, while SteamOS devices ship just the regular thing because you can skip all of that stuff. You pay less, you get more battery life, you get better suspending functionality, you get better performance in most cases, and just overall, a better experience. So yeah, it is an embarrassment for Microsoft. Windows Central, you are correct. Now, there is one thing. Yes, most games are made for Windows, so you're going to be able to play whatever game you want, but you're also going to have problems with playing those games because it's still Windows, because, it's not made for handheld support. Even though you can put it on there, doesn't mean it's going to work great, and this is proof, which is awesome because it shows that it's not just the Steam Deck that makes people want to use that device to play the games. It's also SteamOS. It's Linux that makes it possible because you have all the improvements in resource efficiency and all that sort of stuff with SteamOS and Linux that you don't get with Windows. So it's not necessarily just because the hardware is better on these machines versus the Steam Deck and that sort of things. People are still picking the Steam Deck because it's just a better experience overall. And that's thanks to Linux and SteamOS and what Valve is doing with all of the support. And they're thinking about all the things you need to do to have a good experience, and they're building it into their platform, not only just the Steam Deck, but the operating system. So yeah, SteamOS is not just a Steam Deck thing anymore. It's a legit threat to Windows in the handheld gaming market, which is awesome. And based on what we've seen, it's not really even a fair fight. Even Windows Central doesn't think it's a fair fight, which I'm happy to see. Good job, Valve. NVIDIA has released version 575.57.08, rolls right off the tongue, of their Linux driver, marking the first stable release in the R575 branch. It follows last month's beta and brings a handful of updates focused on bug fixes and hardware support. First up, this driver adds Smooth Motion. NVIDIA Smooth Motion is an AI-based driver feature for GeForce RTX 50 Blackwell GPUs to enhance gameplay fluidity by inferring additional frame data between two rendered frames. So what does all that mean? Well, this feature leverages AI to increase frame smoothness, helping games feel more responsive and fluid, especially at lower frame rates. There's also a big win for mobile gamers, and that is Dynamic Boost is getting smarter. So they extended the NVIDIA PowerD daemon to also support Dynamic Boost while a notebook is running on a battery power. Previously only available when plugged in, laptops now get performance boosts even on battery, useful for gaming on or just GPU workloads on the go. Also, Wayland users, you're going to like this one. They fixed a bug that could cause the applications that use a VKKHR present wait extension to hang on Wayland. This resolves a major pain point for Wayland users running Vulkan applications, helping improve compatibility and reliability. Also, there's some improvements for Minecraft because people who are using Minecraft on X-Wayland were dealing with crashes. That's all fixed now, which is great. Prime Render Offload also sees a key fix. They fixed a bug that prevented Prime Render Offload from working correctly when using NVIDIA GPUs as both the render offload source and the render offload sink. This bug impacted hybrid graphics setups, so fixing this restores full functionality for power-conscious users leveraging the GPU offloading. Plus, there's a new kernel module option to unlock display features. They added a new kernel module parameter, conceal VRR caps, to the NVIDIA mod set kernel module. This parameter may be used to enable usage of features on some displays such as ULMB or ultra-low motion blur, which are incompatible with VRR. So some displays can't handle VRR and ULMB together. This gives users a toggle to prioritize the motion clarity over variable refresh rate. They also made some subtle improvements to the display driver metadata, updated the NVIDIA mode set driver to trim trailing white space from the product name passed to the GPU's audio device as part of the EDID-like data, or ELD. It's minor, but cleaning up EDID data helps avoid obscure bugs and improves device compatibility with audio and video sync. So that's it for the NVIDIA drivers, but just a real quick warning. It's probably not the best option to download the file from NVIDIA's website. You might want to wait for your distribution to publish the updates, so that could be an easier process to do, that sort of thing. You could do it technically if you want to, but it's just not the recommended way. So I think it's best to wait for your distro devs to make the updates for you and just, get them as they come. The Armbian team have announced the release of Armbian 25.5, bringing updates to kernel support, hardware compatibility, and system tooling. It also adds a few new boards and expands what users can do with its Armbian config utility. One of the headline features of this release is broader hardware support. So they have extended the board support for things like TI-SKAM69. They've also added support for Banana Pi M2 Plus, BeagleBone AI64, Beagle Play, and also the Pocket Beagle 2. And this means more developers can take advantage of Armbian stability and performance across both legacy and emerging SBCs, or single board computers. Rockchip users also get a serious kernel bump because devices based on Rockchip 64 now run on Linux kernel 6.14, bringing better performance and peripheral support. Running a newer kernel opens up access to more modern features, better drivers, and improved hardware compatibility. Armbian config gets a major upgrade in usability. One of the biggest areas of growth in Armbian 25.5 is the continued evolution of Armbian config, a system utility for configuring Armbian images after installation. With more users deploying Armbian in production or on home setups, improvements here make managing these systems a lot easier. Speaking of Armbian config, check out the new app deployment system. Users can now deploy popular self-hosted applications directly from Armbian config, introducing stuff like Home Assistant, Sterling PDF, Navidrome, Grafana, NetData, and Image, as well as others. This brings convenience and modularity to the post-install process, with isolated deployments making setup and teardown cleaner. Network configuration also got smarter. A more robust Wi-Fi station detection system improves wireless setup reliability. So reliable Wi-Fi setup is crucial for embedded systems and remote deployments, so this helps reduce system or setup friction, which is great. So that's what's new in Armbian 25.5. If you'd like to learn more about what's in this latest update, you'll find links in the show notes. Thanks for watching this episode of This Week in Linux. If you like what I do here on the show and want to be kept up to date with what's going on in the Linux and open source world, then be sure to subscribe. And of course, remember to like that smash button. If you'd like to support the show and the Tux Digital Network, then consider becoming a patron by going to tuxdigital.com/membership, where you get a bunch of cool perks like access to the patron-only section of our Discord server, access to the patron-only skybox that we have during the live streams every week, as well as the patron-only post show that happens every week after the show is done, and so much more. Go to tuxdigital.com/membership to find out more about all the cool perks. You can also support the show by ordering the Linux is Everywhere t-shirt or the This Week in Linux t-shirt at tuxdigital.com/store. Plus, we also have mugs and hoodies and hats and so much more. tuxdigital.com/store. I'll see you next time for another episode of your source for Linux good news. Thanks again for watching. I'm Michael Tennell. I hope you're doing swell. Be sure to ring that notification bell, and until next time, I bid you farewell.